You ever hear a call sign that makes a room go quiet before anyone even knows why? The question didn't belong to anyone in the bar, but it hung there anyway, buried under the low hum of country music and the soft clink of glass against wood, as if the air itself had remembered something long before the people inside did. Logan Pierce leaned back against the bar, one boot hooked casually on the rail, his posture loose in the way only someone with absolute confidence could manage, the dim amber lights catching the edge of the trident on his cap as he swirled the last inch of bourbon in his glass. Around him, his team filled the space without trying, voices just loud enough to be noticed, laughter sharp enough to claim territory, the kind of presence that didn't ask permission. It was supposed to be a simple night. Leave, a few drinks, nothing official. But Logan never really turned it off. Not the way he scanned reflections in the mirror behind the bar, not the way he clocked every entrance without moving his head. And that's when he noticed the old man. He sat 3 stools down, alone, a weathered leather jacket draped over the back of his chair, one hand resting near a glass he hadn't touched in a while. There was nothing remarkable about him at first glance. Late 70s maybe, gray hair cut short, posture relaxed but not careless. But something about the stillness felt out of place, like a piece of silence dropped into the middle of noise. Logan watched him for a moment longer than necessary, then smirked, nudging the guy next to him before turning his body just enough to face him. "Hey," he called out, voice carrying easily over the music without rising. "Old man, what was your call sign?" A couple of heads turned. Not everyone, just enough. The kind of question that sounded like a joke until it didn't. The old man didn't react right away. He didn't flinch, didn't look annoyed, didn't even acknowledge the voice like most people would. He just sat there, eyes forward, as if the question had been asked from somewhere far away. Logan let out a short laugh, shaking his head. "What? Never had one." One of his teammates chuckled under his breath, another leaned in, interested now. The bartender paused mid-wipe, cloth hovering over the counter. For half a second too long before continuing. Still nothing from the old man. Then, slowly, he reached for his glass, lifting it with a steady hand that didn't match his age, taking a small sip before setting it back down with a soft, controlled tap. His eyes shifted, finally, not to Logan, but to the mirror behind the bar, catching the reflection of the room in one glance. Exits, angles, people. It was subtle, almost invisible if you weren't looking for it. Logan noticed. The smirk on his face held, but something behind it sharpened just a fraction. "Come on," he said, pushing off the bar and stepping closer, boots thudding lightly against the hardwood. "Everybody who's ever done anything's got one. Or at least a story." He rested his forearm on the counter beside the old man, close enough now to see the details. The faint scar running along the knuckle, the worn edge of a plain steel ring, the kind of wear that didn't come from time alone. "So what was it?" he pressed, tone still casual, still light, but with a thread of challenge woven through it. For a moment, the only sound was the low murmur of the bar and the distant slide of ice in a glass. Then the old man turned his head. Not fast, not slow, just deliberate. His eyes were pale, clear, and steady in a way that didn't ask for attention but held it anyway. He looked at Logan like he wasn't seeing a Navy SEAL standing in front of him, but something else entirely, something further back, further down. And when he spoke, his voice was low, rough around the edges, but calm in a way that didn't need to prove anything. "It's been a long time," he said, almost to himself. And for the first time since Logan had opened his mouth, the noise in the bar seemed to pull back just a little, like the room was waiting for something it didn't understand yet. Logan held the old man's gaze for a second longer than he intended, something in that calm, unhurried look pressing against his instincts in a way he did not like, not because it was threatening, but because it was familiar in a place it should not have been, like recognizing a pattern you could not quite name, and he let out a quiet breath through his nose, rolling his shoulders as if to shake it off before the smirk returned, thinner now, but still there. "A long time does not erase it," he said, tapping 2 fingers lightly on the bar top, the sound crisp and controlled. "You do not forget a call sign. Not if it meant anything." One of his teammates, a broad-shouldered operator named Cole, leaned in with a low chuckle, resting his elbow beside Logan. "Maybe it did not," he added, voice easy but edged. "Maybe it was just something they handed out for keeping the coffee hot." A few nearby patrons laughed under their breath. Quick, uncertain sounds that faded almost as soon as they appeared, because the old man still had not reacted the way anyone expected. He did not bristle. He did not defend himself. He simply reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded bill, placing it neatly beside his glass as if he were already preparing to leave, the motion precise, economical, practiced. Logan watched the hand more closely this time. No tremor. No hesitation. Just control. That was when he noticed the way the man's fingers paused for half a heartbeat against the edge of the bar, not gripping, not bracing, just resting there like he was feeling something beneath the surface that no one else could sense. Logan's eyes narrowed slightly. "You military?" he asked, the question direct now, stripped of most of its humor. The old man's gaze shifted again, not to Logan this time, but past him, toward the far wall where a neon beer sign buzzed softly, its light flickering in a slow, uneven rhythm. For a moment, the reflection of that light in his eyes changed, just enough to catch something deeper, something older, and when he spoke again, it was quieter, almost lost under the music. "Once," he said. The words settled heavy in the air, simple but complete, and it did not invite more questions so much as it challenged them. Logan leaned in slightly, lowering his voice without meaning to, the rest of the bar fading to a dull blur at the edges of his focus. "Then you had one," he pressed, softer now but more intent, "and you remember it." The old man finally turned fully toward him, shoulders angling just enough to face the conversation, and for the first time there was a trace of something behind his expression, not anger, not pride, but something closer to distance, like he was measuring whether the moment was worth opening a door that had stayed closed for years. His eyes flicked down briefly, to the steel ring on his finger, worn smooth along one edge, and his thumb brushed it once, a small, unconscious motion that did not belong to the present. Somewhere behind the bar, a glass slipped in a sink and clinked sharply against another, the sound cutting clean through the low noise of the room, and the bartender froze for just a second before setting it down more carefully, his attention no longer on his work but fixed on the two men at the counter. Logan did not notice him. He was watching the old man's hand, the ring, the pause. "What was it?" he asked again, quieter now, almost level, the question no longer a joke, but something closer to a test he did not realize he had already stepped into. The old man exhaled slowly, a breath that carried the weight of time more than effort, and his eyes lifted back to Logan's, steady, unflinching, but now carrying something else beneath the surface, something that did not belong to this bar, this night, or this conversation, something that felt like it had been waiting. "Some names," he said, voice low and even, "are better left where they were used." And for the first time since the exchange began, the air in the room felt different, not quieter exactly, but tighter, like something unseen had shifted just enough for the people inside it to feel without understanding why. Logan let the silence sit for half a second, then smiled again. But this time it did not reach his eyes, because something in the old man's tone had shifted the ground just enough to make the conversation feel less like a game and more like something he could not quite control, and he did not like that feeling. Not here, not in front of his team. "Yeah," he said, voice light but tighter underneath. "Or maybe some names sound better in stories than they do out loud." Cole chuckled beside him, picking up on the change, leaning his weight forward as if to push the moment back into something familiar. "He is saying he does not have one," Cole added, shrugging. "Or, it was nothing worth remembering." A few more quiet laughs flickered around them, but they did not spread the way they had before, not fully, like the room itself was hesitating. The old man did not respond right away. He simply turned his glass slightly, the amber liquid inside catching the bar light, reflecting it in slow, distorted waves that moved across the polished wood. His thumb brushed the steel ring again, slower this time, more deliberate, and for a brief moment his gaze dropped, not in avoidance, but in recognition, like he was seeing something no one else in the room could. The music in the background shifted tracks, the tempo slightly slower, the bass softer, and the air seemed to settle with it. Logan exhaled through his nose and straightened, rolling his neck once before stepping just a little closer, closing the space without making it obvious. "Look," he said, quieter now, more direct. "You do not have to tell a story. Just the call sign." The words landed differently this time. Not a joke, not quite a demand. Something in between. The old man's eyes lifted again, meeting Logan's, and there was no resistance in them, no challenge, just that same steady presence that seemed to absorb everything without reacting. "You think it works like that?" he said, voice calm, almost reflective. Logan frowned slightly. "Like what?" The old man tilted his head just a fraction, as if considering how to answer in a way that would make sense here, in a place like this, surrounded by people who measured things differently. "Like a name is just a word," he said, tapping the edge of the bar once with his finger, soft but precise, "something you can take out and show someone." Cole scoffed lightly, shaking his head. "That is exactly what it is." The old man did not look at him. His gaze stayed on Logan. "No," he said quietly, "not the ones that stay." The bartender stopped wiping the same spot on the counter for the third time, his eyes fixed now, openly watching, something uneasy settling in his chest as he studied the old man's posture, the stillness, the way the conversation had slowed everything else down without anyone realizing it. Logan felt it too, even if he would not admit it, the way the noise in the room seemed farther away, like it had stepped back to give space to something unfolding. He crossed his arms loosely, trying to anchor himself back into control. "Then explain it," he said, tone even, but with an edge that had not been there before. The old man was quiet for a moment, not avoiding, choosing. His gaze drifted past Logan again, to the mirror, to the reflections of the room, to the exits, to the people who were no longer pretending not to listen. And then something changed, not in his posture, not in his expression, but deeper, the kind of change you felt before you understood it. His thumb pressed once against the steel ring, firm, grounding, and for a brief second, his eyes lost focus, just enough to suggest that he was no longer fully in the bar. Somewhere else. Somewhere older. When he spoke again, his voice was lower, steadier, carrying a weight that had not been there before. "Because when it was used," he said slowly, "it was not for introductions." The words settled into the space between them, quiet but absolute. And for the first time since Logan had asked the question, no one laughed, no one moved, and the room did not just feel tight anymore. It felt like it was waiting. The words did not land like a warning or a threat, but they carried something heavier than either, something that settled into the space between them and refused to move, and Logan felt it before he understood it, a subtle shift that made the air feel thinner, tighter, like the room itself had leaned in without anyone noticing. He held the old man's gaze, searching for something familiar to push against, something he could categorize, but there was nothing there that fit neatly into what he knew, and that absence unsettled him more than anything else. "Not for introductions," Logan repeated quietly, almost testing the phrase, then gave a short, dismissive exhale as he straightened slightly, trying to pull the moment back into something he controlled. "Everything starts somewhere," he said, tone steady but firmer now. "Names, units, call signs. You earn them, you use them, and then you move on." Cole nodded beside him, folding his arms, the easy confidence returning to his posture like armor. "That is how it works," he added. The old man did not argue. He did not push back. He simply watched Logan for a moment, as if measuring not the words, but the space behind them, and then his gaze shifted again, drifting past the bar, past the reflections, past the present, and something in his expression changed, not visibly enough for most to catch, but enough that the bartender felt it in his chest, a quiet tightening that made him set the glass down more carefully than necessary. The old man's fingers rested against the bar, still, then tapped once, slow, controlled, like marking a point in time only he could see. The neon sign buzzed again, the light flickering, and for a fraction of a second, the reflection in the mirror warped, stretching the room into something unfamiliar before snapping back. "You do not move on from all of them," the old man said, voice low, even, but carrying a weight that seemed to come from somewhere far beyond the walls of the bar. Logan's jaw tightened just slightly. "Then why keep it?" he asked, leaning in again, not aggressively, but with intent, like he was trying to force clarity out of something that refused to be simple. The old man did not answer right away. His thumb pressed against the steel ring once more, firmer this time, and the world around him seemed to dim, not in reality, but in the way his focus shifted, pulling inward, away from the noise, away from the people, away from the present. The low hum of the bar faded in his ears, replaced by something older, something quieter, the faint echo of a voice over a radio, steady, controlled, cutting through static with a single word that carried more than identification, more than rank, more than presence. Just a word. A call. A signal that meant something had already begun. His eyes did not move, but they were no longer entirely here. Logan saw it. Not the memory itself, but the distance, the way the old man seemed to step somewhere else without physically moving. And for the first time, a flicker of uncertainty slipped through the confidence he had worn all night. It was small, brief, but it was there. "Hey," Logan said, quieter now. The edge in his voice softened just enough to reveal something underneath, something closer to curiosity than challenge. What did it mean? The question hung there, different from the others, stripped of mockery, stripped of posture. The old man blinked once, slow, and the bar came back into focus around him. The music, the lights, the quiet attention of people pretending not to listen. His gaze returned fully to Logan, steady again, grounded, but now carrying something deeper, something that did not need to be explained to exist. "It meant," he said carefully, each word placed with precision, "that when you heard it, you did not need to ask who was coming." The sentence settled into the room, and this time, the silence that followed was not accidental, not awkward, but deliberate, like something had just been placed in the center of the bar that no one quite knew how to approach. And for the first time since the conversation began, Logan did not immediately respond, because somewhere beneath his training, beneath his certainty, something had recognized that answer before his mind could explain it. Logan did not realize he had stopped moving until the glass in his hand had gone completely still, the faint swirl of bourbon settling into a quiet mirror that reflected nothing but the dim bar lights above. And for a moment, he did not speak, not because he had nothing to say, but because the answer he had just heard did not fit into the framework he was used to operating in. And that alone was enough to slow him down in a way few things ever had. Cole shifted beside him, clearing his throat lightly as if to break the pause, his confidence still intact, but no longer as effortless as before. "That sounds like a story," he said, a little sharper now, like he was trying to pull the conversation back into something he could dismiss, not a call sign. A few people at nearby tables nodded subtly, clinging to the familiar interpretation, but their eyes stayed fixed on the old man, waiting. The old man did not react to Cole. His attention remained on Logan, steady, patient, as if he understood that whatever mattered in this moment was not the noise around them, but the shift happening directly in front of him. Logan exhaled slowly, setting his glass down with more care than before, the soft tap against the wood sounding louder than it should have in the quiet that had settled over the bar. "You are saying," Logan began, choosing his words more deliberately now, that the name alone carried that much weight. It was not disbelief. Not entirely. It was something closer to recalibration. The old man gave a small nod, almost imperceptible, but enough. "It was never just a name," he said. Logan's eyes flicked briefly to the steel ring again, then back to the old man's face. And this time, he noticed something he had missed before, not a scar, not a mark, but the absence of tension, the kind of stillness that did not come from calm alone, but from experience layered so deeply it no longer needed to announce itself. Behind the bar, the bartender leaned slightly closer, his movements slower now, quieter, as if he did not want to disturb whatever had taken hold of the room. He had seen men come through this place for years, loud, quiet, proud, broken, but this felt different, and he could not explain why. Logan ran a hand along his jaw, thinking, then looked back at the old man with a new kind of focus, one that had replaced the earlier smirk entirely. "So people heard it," he said, "and they knew." The old man's gaze did not waver. "They did not need confirmation," he replied. The words landed with a clarity that left no room for exaggeration, and for the first time, Logan felt something shift beneath his certainty, not enough to shake it, but enough to force him to adjust his footing. Cole let out a short breath, shaking his head, but there was less conviction in it now. "Everybody has a reputation," he muttered, though quieter than before. Logan did not respond to him. His attention remained locked on the man in front of him, studying, measuring, reassessing. "Then why not say it?" Logan asked, voice lower now, controlled, but no longer casual. if it is just a name. The old man was silent for a moment, his thumb resting against the edge of the ring again, and when he finally spoke, his voice was softer, but carried further than before, because it was never meant to be used like this. The sentence settled into the room, and this time, no one shifted, no one filled the silence, because something in the way he said it made it clear that the conversation had already crossed a line that could not be undone, and Logan felt it, that quiet realization forming. At the edge of his awareness, that he was no longer asking a question for amusement, but standing at the edge of an answer he might not be ready to hear, and still, he did not step back. The old man's words did not fade after he spoke them. They lingered, settling into the air like something permanent, and Logan felt it in the way his own breathing slowed without him meaning it to, in the way the usual rhythm of a room full of strangers had quietly unraveled into something more focused, more precise, like every small sound now carried weight. He studied the man in front of him again, not as a stranger anymore, not as a joke, but as a problem he could not immediately solve, and that alone forced him to shift. Used like this, Logan repeated, softer now, almost to himself, then looked up again, eyes sharper, clearer. You mean, talking about it? The old man did not answer directly. His gaze drifted once more toward the mirror behind the bar, catching the reflection of Logan, of Cole, of the others standing just behind them, their posture no longer relaxed, their attention no longer casual. For the first time since they had walked in, they were not the ones controlling the room. The bartender felt it fully now, a quiet pressure in his chest that made him set down the bottle he had been holding without realizing he had stopped pouring, his eyes fixed on the old man's reflection instead of the man himself, because somehow it felt easier that way. The old man's fingers rested flat against the bar, then slowly curled, not into a fist, not into tension, just into something contained, controlled, and his thumb pressed once more against the steel ring, firmer this time, grounding, anchoring. The motion was small, almost invisible, but Logan caught it, and something about that repeated gesture registered deeper than anything else had. You keep touching that, Logan said quietly, not accusing, not mocking, just observing now, his tone stripped down to its core. The old man glanced at his hand, then back at Logan, and for the first time, there was the faintest trace of acknowledgement in his expression, not agreement, not denial, just recognition that the detail had been seen. It reminds me, he said. Logan tilted his head slightly. Of what? The old man was silent for a moment, and this time the pause felt different, not like he was deciding whether to answer, but like he was deciding how much to let through. The music in the background shifted again, softer now, almost distant, and somewhere near the door, someone who had been laughing moments before went completely quiet without knowing why. The old man's eyes lowered briefly to the ring, then lifted again, steady, present, but carrying something that had not been there before, something heavier, something closer to memory than conversation. Of the last time I heard it, he said. The sentence was simple, but it changed everything. Logan felt it immediately, a subtle tightening in his chest, not fear, not yet, but awareness, the kind that comes before understanding. Heard what? Logan asked, though he already knew the answer he was stepping toward. The old man did not look away. The call sign, he said. The words landed with a quiet finality, and for a brief moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. Logan's jaw shifted slightly as he processed it, his mind moving faster now, connecting pieces, searching for context, for something that would bring this back into a space he could define. And what happened? Logan asked, his voice lower than it had been all night. Not because he was trying to be quiet, but because something in him no longer wanted to break the tone that had settled over the conversation. The old man did not answer right away. His gaze moved past Logan again, not scanning, not analyzing, just remembering. And when he finally spoke, his voice was steady, but carried a weight that did not belong to the present. Everything else stopped, he said. The sentence hung in the air, and this time, no one moved, no one spoke, because without realizing it, the same thing had just happened here. Logan did not realize his fingers had tightened slightly against the edge of the bar until he consciously forced them to relax, the subtle pressure grounding him in the present even as his thoughts tried to catch up with what he had just heard. And for the first time that night, he did not immediately push forward with another challenge, because something in the old man's voice had removed the need to press any harder. The room had changed. Not dramatically. Not in a way that anyone could point to and explain. But it had shifted, the easy noise of conversation replaced by a quieter awareness, like every person inside had instinctively stepped back from something they could not see but could feel. Cole shifted his weight beside Logan, but even he did not speak right away, his usual confidence held in check by something he could not quite name, and when he finally let out a breath, it was softer than before. "That is a nice line," he said, but there was no edge to it now, no bite, just an attempt to fill the space that had opened up. The old man did not respond to him. He remained still, his gaze steady, his presence unchanged, but now it carried a gravity that had not been there at the start of the night, something that did not demand attention but held it anyway. Logan glanced briefly at the others behind him, noticing for the first time that none of them were laughing anymore. None of them were leaning in with that easy confidence they had walked in with, and that realization settled deeper than anything the old man had said. He turned back slowly, his voice lower now, measured. "You were saying that just hearing it changed things," he said. The old man gave a slight nod, almost imperceptible. "It meant something had already begun," he replied. Logan absorbed that, his mind working through it, trying to map it onto something he understood, something structured, but the more he thought about it, the more he realized that whatever this was, it did not fit into a clean explanation, and that was what unsettled him most. He had spent years operating in environments where uncertainty was managed, where variables were controlled, where unknowns were identified and reduced, but this was different. This was something that existed outside of that system entirely. Behind the bar, the bartender finally moved again, but slowly, carefully, like he did not want to disturb the balance that had settled over the room, his eyes still drawn to the old man, to the way he occupied space without effort. Logan shifted his stance, no longer leaning in, no longer crowding, giving the old man just a little more room without realizing he had done it. "So what happens now?" Logan asked quietly, the question no longer a challenge, but something closer to a search for direction, for understanding. The old man looked at him for a long moment, and there was something different in his expression now, not distance, not memory, but recognition, like he had seen this moment before in a different place, under different circumstances, with a different kind of weight. His thumb rested lightly against the steel ring, but this time he did not press it. He did not need to. "Now," he said calmly, "you decide why you asked." The words landed without force, but they carried more impact than anything else he had said, because they shifted the focus entirely, pulling it away from him, away from the past, and placing it directly back in Logan's hands. Logan felt it immediately, the subtle pressure of the question turning inward, forcing him to examine something he had not considered when he first spoke, and for a moment, he did not answer, because the reason he had asked no longer felt as simple as it had just a few minutes ago, and in that silence, something deeper began to take shape, something that had nothing to do with proving a point, and everything to do with understanding what he was standing in front of. Logan did not answer right away, and that silence said more than anything he could have come up with in the moment, because for the first time since he had walked into the bar, he was no longer operating on instinct or habit. He was thinking, actually thinking, about why he had spoken at all, and the answer that had seemed obvious just minutes ago now felt thin, incomplete, like it belonged to a version of himself that had not yet been forced to look twice. His eyes drifted briefly away from the old man, scanning the room without purpose this time, not checking exits, not reading angles, just seeing, really seeing. The way people were watching without pretending anymore, the way the bartender had stopped moving entirely, the way even Cole had gone quiet, arms no longer crossed in confidence, but resting at his sides, uncertain. Logan exhaled slowly, the breath steady, controlled, but carrying something new beneath it, something closer to recognition than resistance. "I asked," he said finally, voice low, measured, "because I thought I already knew the answer." The old man did not react, but there was a faint shift in his eyes, not approval, not correction, just acknowledgement. Logan continued, the words coming more deliberately now, as if each one mattered in a way they had not before. "I thought it would be simple. A name, something to measure, something to compare." He paused, glancing down briefly at the bar, at the faint reflection of his own hand resting there, then looked back up. "But it is not." The statement was quiet, but it carried weight, because it was not directed at the old man anymore. It was directed inward, a recalibration happening in real time. Cole shifted slightly, looking at Logan with a hint of surprise, like he was hearing something unfamiliar, but he did not interrupt. The old man remained still, listening, his presence unchanged, but now it felt less like distance and more like space being held, like he was allowing something to unfold without forcing it. Logan straightened slightly, not in defense, not in posture, but in clarity. "I asked because I thought it was about proving something," he said, his voice steady, grounded. "But it is not about that, is it?" The old man's gaze held his, calm, unwavering, and after a moment, he gave the slightest shake of his head. "No," he said softly. The words settled gently, but it carried more certainty than anything else in the room. Logan nodded once, slowly, absorbing it, and for the first time, there was no tension in his stance, no need to control the space around him. "Then it is about understanding," Logan said, more to himself than anyone else. The old man did not answer, but he did not need to. The shift had already happened. The bartender let out a breath he had not realized he had been holding, his shoulders lowering slightly as the tension in the room eased, not disappearing, but transforming into something quieter, more grounded. Logan looked at the old man again, really looked this time, and whatever he had been expecting at the start of the night was gone, replaced by something else entirely, something he could not define, but no longer felt the need to. "You said some names are not meant to be used like this," Logan said, his voice calm now, steady. "So I am not going to ask again." The words were simple, but they marked a clear line, a decision, made without hesitation. The old man watched him for a moment, and for the first time, there was the faintest hint of something different in his expression, not quite a smile, not quite relief, but something close to respect, quiet and unspoken. Logan reached for his glass, lifting it, but he did not drink right away, just held it for a second, then gave a small nod toward the old man, a gesture subtle enough that most people in the room would miss it, but not him. The old man inclined his head slightly in return, just as subtle, just as deliberate. And in that small exchange, without any announcement, without any explanation, the balance of the room shifted completely, not with force, not with spectacle, but with something far more lasting, something that did not need to be said out loud to be understood. The moment passed without announcement, without applause, without anything that would mark it as important to anyone who had not been paying attention. But for those who had, the shift was undeniable, like a line quietly redrawn in a place no one had realized needed it. Logan lowered his glass slightly, the amber liquid catching the light as his grip relaxed, no longer tight, no longer controlled out of habit, just steady, and for the first time that night, there was nothing in his posture that needed to prove anything. He looked at the old man again, not searching now, not measuring, just seeing him for what he was, or at least accepting that there was more there than he needed to understand. "Have a good night," Logan said, his voice calm, even, carrying no edge, no challenge, just respect in its simplest form. The old man met his gaze, and this time, there was no distance behind his eyes, no reflection of something far away, just presence, grounded and real. He gave a small nod, almost imperceptible, but it held weight, the kind that did not need to be explained. Logan stepped back, not abruptly, not retreating, just creating space, the kind that should have been there from the beginning. And as he turned slightly, his team followed without question, without the need for a signal, their earlier energy replaced by something quieter, more aware. Cole hesitated for half a second, glancing once more at the old man, then gave a short nod of his own before turning away, his usual confidence still there, but tempered, refined. The bartender finally moved again, picking up the cloth he had forgotten in his hand, but even as he wiped the counter, his movements were slower, more deliberate, his eyes flicking back once, then twice, as if trying to hold on to something he could not quite name. The low hum of the bar began to return, conversations restarting in small pockets, laughter creeping back and cautiously, like the room was testing whether it was allowed to be normal again. Logan walked toward the door, the sound of his boots soft against the floor, and just before he reached it, he paused, not turning around, not looking back, but standing there for a brief second, as if acknowledging something without needing to see it again. Then he stepped out into the cool night air, the door closing quietly behind him. Inside, the old man remained seated for a moment longer, his hand resting lightly near the glass, the steel ring catching the dim light as his thumb brushed it once more, softer this time, not grounding, not anchoring, just remembering. He reached for the bill he had placed earlier, sliding it slightly forward, then stood, his movements unhurried, controlled, the same quiet presence he had carried from the start. As he turned to leave, he paused briefly near the bartender, placing the bill down with a small nod that was returned without words, an understanding passing between them that did not need to be spoken. The old man stepped toward the door, the noise of the bar fading behind him with each step, and as he reached it, he stopped for just a moment, his hand resting lightly on the handle. His eyes lifted, not to anything in front of him, but somewhere beyond, somewhere only he could see, and for a brief second, the reflection in the glass showed not the bar, not the lights, but something older, quieter, something that had not changed with time. Then he opened the door and stepped out into the night, the sound of it closing soft and final behind him. And inside the bar, without anyone saying it out loud, without anyone needing to, something had settled into place, something that would stay long after the glasses were cleared and the lights were dimmed, a quiet understanding that respect is not something you ask for, not something you demand, but something that reveals itself when the moment calls for it, and once it does not need to be spoken again.